Welcome everyone to Say Hello to Smart Investing. I'm Claire Sinton, Head of Workplace Saving Analysis, and I'm delighted to be joined in the HL studio by Sarah Coles, our Head of Personal Finance and one of my Financially Fearless ambassadors, as well as also Andrea Painter, one of our chartered financial planners who has over 30 years of experience of advising clients on managing their finances. So who better to join us to talk all things money this afternoon? Hi Sarah, hi Andrea.
Hello.
So it's International Women's Day on Saturday this week, and the theme this year is to accelerate action. At HL, we are keen to accelerate action on helping people empower their finances, and it's actually through our Financially Fearless initiative that we are on a mission to empower women to save and invest with confidence, and we do that 365 days a year. So this afternoon we're going to spend the next hour or so talking through what you can do in terms of actions to boost your financial resilience in order to use investments to make your money work harder, as well as close the gender pension gap. I do need to say before we get started that everything discussed will be information, not financial advice, as well as the fact that we're apologising for being a couple of minutes late due to some technical difficulties, but hopefully everything is running smoothly from now on. So if you have any questions, please do raise those through the Q&A, and we will try our best to answer as many as possible towards the end of the session. And without further ado, we'll get started. So Sarah, I'm going to come to you first. The theme for International Women's Day is Accelerate Action. Where would you most like to see action?
Well, I think for all of us, I think we can sort of look to ourselves in terms of action. I think one of the problems is that we often think ourselves to a standstill. So we're so desperate to get things right that we don't do anything at all. So I think it can really help to do two things. One of them is to try and think of your financial decisions. You're not really making a right or a wrong decision. It's a bit like choosing a holiday. So the idea with a holiday is you might think, well, I want somewhere a bit sunny, maybe with a museum. And if you think that, well, then you might want to go to Greece or Italy, and both are fine. Both are fine decisions. And the same goes for things like investment. There's not one investment out there that suits you and everything else is terrible. There are loads that will suit you. So make that decision about what you want and know that you are not making a binary, one thing is right, one thing is wrong decision. And the other thing I would say is break things down into bite-sized chunks. If you see, I've got to sort out all my finances, it's a huge job and you just will never get around to it. If you think, right, okay, I'm going to keep a spending diary for a week to see where my money goes, that's much easier and you can get started. So think about what you want to achieve and then just break it down and take that very first step.
Great tips. And Andrea, you've been advising clients for over 30 years. Where do you think action is most needed?
I think during my time that I've been giving advice to clients, the key thing that I've seen is a little bit like you've just said, Sarah. Most people procrastinate and most people think that you already need to be wealthy in order to start investing. And they just put it off and they think, when I'm rich, I'll plan on getting rich. And they think it's for men to do, not for women to do, and they'll rely on their husbands to do it, or they'll think it's for the chap in the office to do it, not for them to do it. And the biggest thing that I kind of see is it's about doing a little bit of something now, still living your life, saving for the future, as well as living your life, and to keep building on that. And the way that I've seen people get in and achieving their financial goals is not because they won the lottery or inherited a lot of money or came into a big sum of money and invested it. It's the people that have saved a little bit and often and every time they've had their pay rise or they have come into some money that they've put some of that away for the future. But they're not necessarily going out without today. I think people tend to work in this world where they think it's an extreme. They've got to invest all their money into shares, or they've got to put all their money in the bank, or they've got to spend all their money or save all their money. It's just a way of life. Save a bit for tomorrow.
I think there's a couple of really key pointers there. So the first is we do have this lifelong juggle of kind of prioritising and balancing immediate needs as well as our future needs. So I think the earlier that we all adapt and learn that savings discipline, the better, because once you've built that healthy habit, it's much easier to keep it consistent. But the other thing is hearing you say that people think you need to be earning more to be able to save more. That's something we hear a lot. I will save more when I earn more, and the reality is actually your expenses just rise to meet your income level. So there is never a great time to save. So it's building that savings discipline in. I think the one thing that I would like to see accelerated action in is better financial education in schools. I think actually if we pedal back a couple of steps, if we are teaching things like compounding, why you need a pension, why investments are fundamental tools to grow your wealth early on, then we would go some way to closing these financial gender gaps as well as investing gaps that we see. And beyond that, I think actually we as individuals, we can all look to carve out just that little bit of time where we can prioritise our financial self-care, whether it's through a podcast, a book, and actually I think a quote that I saw the other day that I really liked, which is on screen now, is the more that you learn, the more you earn. And I think knowledge really is power, whether it's financial knowledge or whether it's knowledge about your health, it really helps you take control. So moving on to our next question then, which is looking at money mindset. Sarah, society has historically had gendered financial activities. Often the idea that women control the daily finances and men control the longer investment planning decisions. What's the impact of those societal views on women when it comes to money?
Well, I think part of the problem with how we think about money is that we've allowed other people to define what kind of a subject money is. So if you think about how we're trained as women, we're trained as generalists. So a really good example of this is if you go into a magazine shop, which if they still exist, and have a look through the women's magazine section. The women's magazines will tell you you've got to be an expert in fashion and food and interiors, and you've got to know lots about lots. If you look in the men's section, you have to be a specialist. So you can be a specialist who's interested in just Formula One or just fishing or just money. And that's where money lives in our society. So I think when you're kind of thinking about the money mindset, I think the big problem is that people think they have to be a specialist in order to be interested in money or in order to be involved in the world of investment. When actually it's part of being a generalist, it's part of everyday life. You don't have to be interested or obsessed. It doesn't have to be your hobby. You don't have to be one of those people who just talks about one thing. It can be something that you are across in the same way that you're across all these other things in your life. And yet it's something that, you know, you don't have to embrace. I think one of the examples I always give is, you know, if pushed, you could probably name 6 styles of jeans. That's not information that you particularly wanted to pick up. You've just picked it up because it's been served to you and you're kind of a bit interested. If you take the time to find those places where the information is about investments and all the rest of it, you'll pick up that information so much more quickly, and it's going to be so much more useful than knowing what a bootcut jean looks like.
As well as bootcut, flares.
I was going to say, I quite like knowing the jean styles.
Boyfriend jeans, I think we've got 6. But I think those society stereotypes, so depicting women as spenders while men are often cast as investors, they do have an impact on how we perceive money and our money mindset. And that money mindset is that set in beliefs and attitudes that actually really we hold individually about money and can impact our financial behaviours. Really interestingly, your money mindset is largely formed by the age of 7, and it's that lens that you make financial decisions through. So if you think about it, actually, it's the emotional triggers with money. So we don't always make decisions about money from a place of logic. Actually, quite often it is from a place of emotion. So do we spend when we are, you know, celebrating, or do we treat others when we're feeling a little bit blue, or treat ourselves? So all of those links to how we spend and how that our emotion impacts that. I think those emotional triggers can lead us astray. So once we have awareness of those, it can mean that we've got really solid foundations to build upon. Andrea, do you have any thoughts on all of this?
The topic of money is, I mean, I've had clients where they've cried in meetings. I've had clients where they've been scared in meetings. People are scared of money. It's a very, very emotive subject. I've had husbands and wives fall out about it. I've had money discovered that they didn't know about. I've had, you know, all sorts of things. But I think women do think differently about money. The psychology of money is one thing, but I think women tend to have a bit of a different attitude because of the stereotyping that's happened historically. But I think the thing that probably is a little bit different between men and women when it comes to psychology is that women probably want more financial security than men. Men are more of risk takers generally. Women just want to be secure. Maybe that's a nurture thing. But the biggest problem that people have with money, in my experience, is that they have this mental accounting issue, which is they'll be saving for a holiday, and I'm saving and I'm building up and I'm building up and I'm building up. And when you look at it from the outside, and you'll be like, what about this credit card debt over here? Well, yeah, but I've got savings over here. And actually, sometimes when you show people what we would call net worth, which is where you take all your assets and take all the liabilities away from it, they've never actually looked at it like that, because they've got their money in these different boxes, and they might see it as, I've got my money for retirement, but I'm carrying all this debt today and I'm paying all this interest today. And whereas when we're looking at it from a financial planning perspective, we're looking at the whole picture. People rarely look at the whole picture. They've got all this emotion that comes with money, but they deal with it by putting it into little boxes and treating it differently. That's just where I think it comes from.
That is something that actually comes up a lot in financial wellbeing meetings as well. Should I prioritise saving or should I prioritise debts? And the key thing to take away there is that you prioritise high cost debts. That's typically short-term debt that's unsecured, things like your credit card, your overdraft, if you have a short-term loan. Typically you would pay those down first prior to saving, and that's because if you look at the interest rates, the likelihood is if it's credit card debt or an overdraft, your interest rate could be 30% plus. If you're therefore putting money into your savings every month and you're only getting 4%, then you are losing money. So it's a bit like taking one step forward and one step back. Sarah, how can people start to understand their money mindset, and why should they want to, I guess, is also a key question.
Well, I think it's lucky that, I suppose, one of the many generalist subjects we are interested in is sort of relationships and psychology, and you can apply that to money in the same way that you apply it to really anything else in your life. So it's really important, I think, to take a closer look at why you feel the way that you feel about money. So one of the really common examples is if somebody grew up without very much money, so it can affect how they feel about it. So some people can be quite anxious about money because they grew up with less. And that might mean, for example, that they're afraid of spending money. Or they might sort of grow up sort of feeling that, they've really got to hoard everything, and they won't sort of necessarily think about it because they're so worried about it. So they just bung it all in one savings pot. So I think if you kind of take that step back and think, why do I feel this way about money? And what can I do to change the negatives? There will be some positives in there. There's some really, there's a positive in every relationship. There's a positive. So I, take a look at that as well. So, for example, one of the things that very commonly women have within their money mindset is they want to do the right thing, and this is partly cultural. That we're all, the good daughter syndrome, I think it's called. So we want to do the right thing, which is why typically we want to save, because we know that that's the right thing. We also need to kind of embrace investment as the right thing, because sometimes it sits in people's brains as like a slightly risky thing that, maybe isn't for them. If you can encompass all the things that you want to achieve within the right thing, saving, investing, paying down your debt, then you can use that to drive yourself. Similarly, know your limitations. So, one of the things that I, find very useful is I know that I get started on things and then over time I do lose interest. So if I'm going into something, whether it's a diet or whether it's, spending plans, or most recently it was planning towards going away on a holiday, and I actually involved a friend and said, look, you keep me honest. We'll talk about it on a regular basis. We'll make sure that we're both doing the right thing that we plan to do, and that neither of us are cheating. And that's why I got to go away on holiday with her.
That is what friends are for keeping you accountable and for holidays. I think the penny really dropped for me with money mindset around something called the reticular activating system, which is something that you have in your brain, which is where you declare a desire. And that, like wanting a car, for instance, if there's any fairy godmothers listening, then I would really like an electric VW camper van. That's on my wish list. Quite a way off that. But you prime your brain to look for it. That's why if you desire something and you desire that car, you'll then start to see them everywhere on the road. So you've given it a mission, and it's the same thing with money and saving. So if you constantly tell yourself that you are bad at saving and that actually you are a spender, it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your brain will you primed your brain, and your brain will look to make that action happen. So there is a lot of power in just reframing your mindset, telling yourself that you are a good saver and that you are great at it, and then gradually those habits will become healthier over time. And part of the way to hold yourself accountable, as well as friends, is having a plan.
Yeah.
And Andrea, as a financial planner, how important is having a plan? I mean, the word is literally in your job title.
Well, there was a saying, Benjamin Franklin, that if you plan to fail, then you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And literally, my role is about helping people to put together a plan. So we perhaps look at, I mean, what clients will often say when I go to see them is the approach that we use is something that they've never done before. And actually, it's something that everybody should do. We do something called a lifeline, where we look at their life on a line. So we're looking at, right, this is where you are right now. Obviously, you're going to be dead at the end, but you know, when do you want to retire? Obviously, when do you want to retire? What sort of things are going to happen between now and then? Do you want to move home? Are your children going to be going into education? Or, you know, are you going to have some life events come up? You know, are there big holidays on the horizon? Are there mortgages to pay off? You know, what are the things that could go wrong? You know, might you need care at a later date? And, you know, so we help them to look at what their life would look like, and then we can look at, well, what have you got saved and where is it? And, you know, help them to, we call it earmarking, but to earmark various assets, so the savings arrangement or the investment arrangements, to what could be used for what, and whether it's in the most efficient place where it is at the moment. So longer term goals, you would have a longer term investment plan with it. If it was more short term, you'd be surprised the amount of people that are investing, thinking I'm doing the right thing with my money because I'm investing it and I'm putting it on the stock market, but you need it for next year. And then people that are saving for, I don't know, moving house in 10 years' time, and they're just saving it in the bank. So a plan where you're looking at it objectively and then able to look at, well, what are the pros and cons of what you're doing, and, you know, how best to arrange the money and where it could be invested, generally helps people to get a better handle on their finances.
I like that phrase, fail to prepare to fail. It's something
Get it the right way around there, Claire.
Something that I very much live by. Probably take it a bit too far when I prepare itineraries for holidays. I'm sure my partner and friends would say it's maybe a step too prepared. What quick fire tip would you give to someone that's looking to review or get started on their plan?
I think depending on where you're at with it, but obviously I'm going to say you should consult financial advice, because it's a bit like what you just said, Sarah. If you engage somebody else in helping you, you've got that objective look at it, but you've also got somebody who's monitoring the plan for you. But I think if you were to take me out of the equation, I think the quick fire tip would be to look at your finances and actually assess them, because when we have a meeting with a client, we'll say to them, could you prepare X, Y, Z? And if they've forgotten, or they're hunting all over the place, people have got money all over the place and literally actually have no real idea of what they've got. I think I've got a pension there. I think I've got a savings account there.
And Sarah, what about you? What quick fire tip would you give to take action and get on top of your finances?
Well, I think, I mean, one of the key ones I would say is, this is something that my mum came up with many years ago. She called it the gin and tonic decision. And the gin and tonic decision is the decision that is never wrong. So if you were in a bar and someone says to you, what do you want to drink? Start by thinking, I want a gin and tonic. And then you question whether that's right, actually, whether you'd rather have a beer that particular day.
Okay.
And the same goes with, I think, with making decisions about plans and sort of looking further ahead. Have a gin and tonic decision in mind. So say, right, if I can't make my mind up, for example, you know, maybe somebody's gin and tonic decision might be, if I can't choose where to invest, maybe a multi-asset fund or a global tracker is a sensible sort of maybe place to start. And that's your gin and tonic decision. So you can get going without at every single stage having to agonise over every decision. And also, you know, obviously gin and tonic. That's a great gin and tonic decision.
I think both of those great tips. I think mine would probably be around creating a smart spending plan. So this idea of writing down what you've got coming in, knowing what your expenses are, going back to this balancing your immediate needs with future you. So there is an example of a smart spending system online, but basically this enables you to understand where your money is going, because even myself, I sometimes think, where is all that monthly money gone when it gets towards the end of the month? It's not yet been payday. So where is it gone? And if you have a plan for it, I think plans tend to get a bit of a bad rap as a bit restrictive and a bit boring, but actually it just means that you are able to spend on what you enjoy because you have thought it through and it's conscious spending. So do have a think about a smart spending system. It will mean you're able to reach your goals, like going on holiday or saving for a home, much easier because there is that plan in place. So we're going to circle back now to the money mindset, which is shaped by age 7, which means that children's environmental influences and parents have a big influence on shaping that. And parents can take a really active role actually in shaping their children's money mindset. Sarah, you've got a couple of teenagers at home.
Yeah.
Do you talk to them about money?
I do. One of the things I find really interesting is, so I have one boy and one girl, and I think you might assume that if no one if you don't talk to your kids about money, nobody's doing it. Actually, social media is talking to them about money, and in really, really different ways. So my son gets served a lot of investment content on social media. My daughter has never been served a single investment piece of content.
Wow.
She gets served spending content.
Oh.
So if you're not involved in those sorts of conversations with your kids, somebody else is talking to them about them, and the gendered sort of conversations they're having are really worrying as far as
stereotypes on
women are
social
concerned.
media.
I mean, I think, so what tends to be the case, so for example, my son, because he's fundamentally doesn't really want to work for a living, he'd like to have a passive income. So therefore, he's totally into investing from day one. He's 18 now. He's got his matured jai, so he's into it. My daughter is less interested in that. She's more worried about money. So having conversations with her very much around things like student debt, things like how she's ever going to be able to afford a house. You're kind of talking to her about her worries. So sometimes those worries are cured by things like having a good budget, but also her knowing that you can cure your worries by doing things like investments. So things like a lifetime ISA, where if she wants to buy a house, actually she can put some money into a lifetime ISA and invest it. So it's got the sort of tax efficiency, the government bonus, and also the investment growth. So it's kind of finding the things that are on their minds and harnessing those things and using them to sort of encourage a sort of broad view of their finances as well.
So using those everyday examples to teach about money, but also investment accounts. If your children are slightly older and teenagers, you can use those to explain how you can grow money. I think for younger children, where attitudes to money is starting to form by age 7, money is invisible now, which is quite an interesting concept, because when I was a child, I remember getting my pocket money and it was tangible. I could see the change I was getting, whereas now it's a more interesting discussion because those transactions are invisible, and the average age of the first online purchase is 10.
Yeah.
So they are making online purchases at an age where that mindset is starting to form. So using everyday examples to teach about money, whether it's the calculation on the weekly food shop to talk about inflation, or whether you are saying, actually, rather than putting the heating on, energy prices have gone up, so we're going to pop on another jumper, as well as investment accounts, can be really valuable and start to make a big impact. Andrea, is preparing for children or perhaps discussing finances with children something you talk about with your clients?
Most of the clients that I deal with, to be fair, their children are at university and they're not young children, but I have got an example about young children that is scary of what the world's coming to, which I'll come back to. But yes, they're generally talking to me because they're making big life decisions about their own finances and they're taking investment advice on how to. So they've brought up their children in a certain way that, generally speaking, those children are doing what your children are doing. Talking about either not spending money or investing money, but they're not oblivious about money. What my worry with children nowadays is my daughter went for a period of working at the zoo. And so children were coming in, obviously, to the gift shop with their parents all the time. And do you want a toy? Do you want a toy? Do you want a toy? And the parents can have your card, the children were. So these are toddlers, debit card in for the purchase of the £50 tiger that they've just bought in the shop with literally no idea about money. And I think what you've just said in terms of just helping children to understand that things cost money, just from a very early age, kind of helps them to, right now you're earning some money, whether it's your pocket money.
Yeah.
Let's budget a little bit of that to saving for the lion that you want at the zoo next year, and a little bit of today for whatever you want, you know, from the shops. But yeah, it's definitely about educating all the way along.
I think one of the best things I did was give my kids pocket money because, and I did it quite young, because you'd get to the stage. I know anyone who's ever taken a child to a supermarket knows it's just hell on earth. And then you've got the kids going, can I have a magazine? Can I have some sweets? Once they had pocket money, you could say, yeah, if you want to spend your money on that, that's your choice. I'm not going to buy it here because I give you pocket money for that. And then suddenly they were like, oh, I'm not so sure.
Don't want to
actually.
spend it now.
I don't really want that magazine quite as much. And it really helps them prioritise.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a life skill they're building then from the beginning.
And there's two ways that can really work. You can use pocket money in terms of earning opportunities, so actually realising that you have to earn money and its value. But then also, I think that there's a children's author that suggests that you use several different pots when you use pocket money. So you can have a pot that is for immediate needs, so for spending, and then you've got one for saving, and then you've got one for giving. So perhaps if you've got birthdays coming on to teach the value of giving as well. So we're going to leave talking about the money mindset and children there. We're going to move on to women levelling them up. So we are earning and owning more, and 60% of wealth will be in the hands of women in the next couple of decades. We're earning money at a faster rate than ever before. And Sarah, being your own boss has also boomed in popularity. Flexibility is probably the main attraction, particularly around childcare. But being your own boss does mean you don't have an employer providing your salary or any other benefits. So what powers of guidance can you share to ensure that going freelance or going self-employed doesn't mean that you are financially vulnerable?
Okay, so this was something I did. So for 10 years I worked for myself, and it was an effort to juggle childcare and also the excitement of working for yourself, but largely to juggle childcare. And I think definitely the things that I picked up is that sense of you have to make your own plans. Nobody is looking after you. So it's easy to sort of look at the money that you're making and think, that's my money, that's great. But there's a lot of work that money needs to do. Not least, you've got to put the money aside for your tax. You've also got to think about sort of planning for those leaner months and whether or not you've got enough to cover you. And then, as you say, you don't get things like life insurance. So we do a piece of research, it's called the HL Savings and Resilience Barometer, and part of that looks at life insurance, and it found that only 30% of parents have enough life insurance. So that's enough to cover basically the needs of your children until they're 18. And it's partly because we just don't realise quite how much we need. We might have, life insurance to cover the mortgage, but we don't necessarily look at whether or not we've got enough cover for our kids. And it's something that you might get through work. It's without work, you really do need to look after that. You've also got to look at things like emergency savings, which are vitally important particularly for the lean months, but also for emergencies. And one of the things that I got very involved with when I was doing it was I wanted to take any kind of risk out of the process that I could. And so for a lot of years, I lived in what we used to call the world's smallest flat, on the grounds that we weren't overexposed to things like the mortgage or everyday expenditure, and so therefore we had that extra level of protection. So it's actually making compromises in lots of areas of your life in order to make sure that you have that sort of bedrock of security when you don't have an employer.
And another thing that I've worked with in the workplace of dealing with employees is the acknowledgement that if you decide to leave an employer and go freelance, all of that financial insurance, all of those benefits stop. They don't move with you. So just the awareness of that. I think research shows that women are both less likely to have thought of or purchased life insurance. And without being a Debbie Downer, we know that relationships either end in two things, divorce or death. So having that plan B is really important. So Andrea, we are also seeing the rise of the female breadwinner, and as a result, have you found that you are advising more female clients? Do you find that those advice triggers or milestones tend to differ?
I think what I have seen over my career is it's really changed. It's gone from in the beginning where the women didn't work, and now you're finding that the women are the main wage earner. But yes, of course, that obviously then brings to the table other considerations. So to be the breadwinner, is the partner not working, or are you both at work? And whether or not one's earning more than the other, but if you're both at work and you have got children, then who's looking after those children, and who's looking after the house, and who's going to be paying for that if there was something to happen to one of those earners. I don't want to say in particular the female, because it works both ways, but if you've got, you know, somebody out to work who's earning the lion's share of the money and also doing the childcare and also running the house, who's going to do all that role if one of you were to be injured, died, etc. But the triggers of women are different, because obviously we've got divorce, you know, which seems to be more frequent. Generally speaking, women outlive the men, typically. So you've got death, and what you're also finding is that women are getting wealthy as a result of their parents and the other generation above them starting to pass wealth through the generations. So historically, you know, if we went back to the 1950s, women weren't allowed money. We weren't deemed to be capable of looking after our own money, but now they're being given their parents' wealth to say, you might as well have it now. So yeah, the triggers are different, and females, we're advising more and more nowadays.
I think one of the things that definitely happens with divorce is people sort of miss some of the changes that happen. So there's really obvious things like there's less money coming in, but they also don't think about what happens for, I mean, life insurance, I've been banging on about it now, but for example, if you're relying on child maintenance payments, is your ex-partner insured? Is their life insured?
Yes.
So if they were to pass away, you would then get something to help you bring up the children. It's the sort of thing you think, I want a clean break, don't want any of it. Actually, that sort of thing is really, really important.
And women typically inherit twice, so from parents and then spouse if we live longer. So that brings us nicely on to one of the first financial gaps that we are going to talk about before we conclude this afternoon session, and that is the investing gap. So women are less likely to invest across all age groups than men. The gender investing gap starts at age 19, and then it just grows and grows. So we know that despite all the challenges, so the fact that women are more likely to take on greater unpaid responsibilities or domestic responsibilities, the pay gap, the fact that they're more likely to take on part-time work, actually women are really great at saving. We are just less likely to opt for an investment account and more likely to opt for cash when it comes to men. And actually, we've decided to kickstart this section of the session with some myths, and we're going to bust those. So the first one is that investing is only for the wealthy. That's not true at all. Investing has never been more accessible. The second is that investing is only for experts and people that know enough. Again, that's not true. Sarah's already touched on the fact that you can use an index fund or a fund that's managed by an expert. And the second is that actually the third is that women aren't good with money, and we've just confirmed that actually women are great at saving. So Sarah, why do women need to invest? And what tips can you share for someone who is looking to get started?
Well, I would say it really is just one of the basics in life. It's not something we see as one of the basics, but just in the same way that we all need to save and we all need to budget, actually investment is just part of that picture. So I think it pays not to think about investment as a thing in itself. Investment is about what it can do for you. So putting money aside for the long term, how is that going to either, you know, protect you or give your children opportunities or let you do the things that you want to do. So I think that, you know, the importance of investing, it's kind of to show people that it is part of their life. It is part of their life already. So if they've got a pension through work, they're already investors. That pension is invested. So if you're choosing not to pay any attention to it, then that's like a whole big chunk of your money you're not paying any attention to. So don't just think, oh, it's not something for me. It is already something that you're doing. It's just worth actually sort of getting to know what, you know, a bit more about it. And I think one of the things I would say is women are. I mean, there's a gap that I think is part of the investment gap, and it's the knowledge gap. Now, this isn't that women don't know enough. That's not the knowledge gap. The knowledge gap is women think they need to know more than they actually do. So women think that they need to be able to have it as their chosen sort of subject on Mastermind in order to go anywhere near investment. You know, you talked about the fact that you can start investing from £25 a month. You can put that money into an investment. You can pick something, a gin and tonic choice, and then you are already investing. And then from there, you can grow your knowledge. So don't think you need to know everything, suddenly be an expert. You can maybe just say, right, once a month I'm going to read an article, or I'm going to listen to a podcast, or I'm going to watch a YouTube video. just pick something small and you will gradually build your knowledge whilst gradually building your investments. And then by the time you get, enough in the pot that you're thinking about diversifying and trying something else, you've built enough knowledge so that you're very confident about the next step that you want to take. So it's kind of gradually building things up. Don't think I'm going to have to build this huge bank of knowledge and then lump myself in at once. Just take it all really gently and gradually grow it, and then it's so much less off-putting.
Some great tips there in terms of progress, not perfection. And Andrea, the word risk comes out a lot when it comes to investing. But what do we actually mean by risk with investing?
I think the word risk is a scary thing. It's like saying to somebody pain, I think. But, we obviously all know that investments go down as well as up. What we don't perhaps always understand is investment cycles, and that the stock market tends to run every 5 to 7 years. There's some kind of event that will cause stocks to go down. And the fact that it is so familiar in history, it's a bit like saving. That's just going to happen. You need to accept it. I think the real risk is in investing money that you need for something short term. So going back to the whole lifeline and planning out what you need for when, if realistically you don't need your money for 10 years, you're going to invest through 2 different investment cycles. So you can afford to have ups and downs. So therefore you're starting to take some of the risk out of that. If you need that money in 3 years' time, risk has got a whole different connotation to it when you're investing, because there is a risk that you could hit a bad point in the investment cycle in that 3-year period. So what we tend to do is we tend to ask people what their understanding is of risk. We tend to explain what risk is. We tend to talk about different asset classes. What we tend to do is understand something called capacity and tolerance, and they're 2 different things. So somebody can have high capacity, which means they've got the ability to invest a lot of money, but low tolerance, they don't like losing any money. You can have somebody that can have high tolerance, but very little capacity. They're the kind of people you see at the races, putting all their money on the perceived fastest horse. But the risk is in not investing for the right objective, with the right timescale in mind. And, all of this is really about planning. It kind of all links up, that risk is in the perception of when you need that money.
So the key takeaway there is that investing is for the long term. When we say long term, we're really talking about money you can tie up for 5 years or more.
Yeah.
Because actually, what people don't talk about enough is that there is risk in not doing anything. So if you are holding cash long term for periods of 5 years or more, then actually there is a very real but invisible threat, and that's inflation.
Yeah.
Your purchasing power is reducing if you're holding cash for long periods of time, which is why actually investments are used to help potentially outbeat inflation and grow our money. Sarah, what are the golden investing rules that you live by?
The key one for me is to automate it, because I am so ridiculously hectic all the time in life, got just so many things on the go, that if I didn't automate it, I would never get around to it. That's my general rule in life for everything. So a direct debit is a really easy way of doing it. And if it's into, again, don't want to think about it too much, if it's into an individual savings account, so an ISA, then I don't have to think about tax. So it's actually those sort of, do the things that are so easy you don't have to think about them. I think the other one is also to think about your comfort zone. So I am naturally an incredibly risk-averse person. I mean, I just can't bear any risk at all. Every time my 18-year-old son gets in his car, I immediately just think the worst, and I've got like a million scenarios going through my head. And I think it's really important for me to question that, to think, okay, well, I want to basically wrap everything in the entire universe up in cotton wool, but why? And what will the impact of that be? And how can I kind of go beyond that comfort zone without, as you say, without taking enormous risks or risks that I don't understand, but how can I sort of build out from where I am and question that comfort zone?
Which is brilliant information, and you've got all of those on screen as well. So our final stop on our Female Financial Resilience Whistle Stop Tour is pensions and how to secure your dream retirement. We are all very familiar with the pay gap, but actually what's much less talked about is the pension gap. And the pension gap is actually the staggering difference between what women can expect to retire on as an average pot in comparison to what the average man can retire with. So you can see those figures on screen now. So the average female pension pot at the point of retirement is around £70,000. The average male pension pot is around £206,000. And that matters, put simply, because ultimately, when it comes to pensions, the bigger the pension, typically the better, and that's because you will have much more choices when it comes to the age at which you can retire, but also how you can withdraw that income, your lifestyle in retirement. So Sarah, those gaps, well, the gap is there because of those common sense things like women more likely to take time off to have children, more likely to work part-time, the pay gap, but it's the differing working patterns, isn't it, that has the biggest impact. So that makes up about 50% of that gap. What can people do to close it?
Well, I think the important thing is to try and commit to your pension contributions for life. So you may have gaps in your employment, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have gaps in your pension contributions. So one of the really useful things to know is if you go on maternity leave, for example, if you can keep up your contributions, you're paying contributions on your maternity pay. Whereas your employer keeps paying the contributions they were paying before, so they're carrying much more of the burden. Even better than that, if you've got a salary sacrifice scheme, so if your pension is set up through work through what's known as salary sacrifice, actually your employer pays it all. So don't think, oh, I'm going on maternity leave, I must cut my contributions to nothing. Actually factor it in, see if you can find a way to afford that percentage of your maternity pay, because you can get a lot more sort of bang for your buck if you can keep making those payments. I'd say a lot of it also comes down to communication with you and, you know, if you're with a partner, with you and your partner, because it may be that you think, well, I'll just leave it all to them. They can, you know, have all the pension savings and we'll sort it out in retirement. You can make the same sort of decisions about how you manage money between you today. So, for example, you can say, you know, I might be working part-time for a period of time and I won't be making quite so much money. You'll be earning more money. Maybe I don't have enough money to pay into a pension. Well, don't think about it like that. Think, well, actually, I'm working part-time, but I really do need to keep paying into a pension. What can you take off my shoulders so that I can afford that? Yeah. So you're having those tricky discussions now rather than saving them up for retirement. And I think that if you can make that commitment and stick with it, even when times are a little bit tighter, then it's a much easier way to kind of keep building your way, because it's, you know, it's the early, I can easily say you can catch up later, which is what a lot of people end up doing. You've got to work so much harder when you're catching up later. Again, the other thing that is really key, and I, again, banged on about investment quite a lot, but your pension is invested. You can make investment decisions with your pension, and you can make decisions, you can think, well, I want to prioritise growth. And if you don't make a decision, it'll go into a fund that's kind of middle of the road, okay for most people, you know, basically bog standard. You might want to think, well, I want it to work a bit harder than that so I can get it to close the gap for me as well. So there's quite a few things you can do without just having to pile all your money into a pension when you get older.
Absolutely. And actually, in terms of those workplace default funds, as you say, they have to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And the likelihood is your pension providers will enable you to select outside of that, and you don't have to put all your eggs into a new fund. The chances are you can actually just start by putting a portion into an alternative fund. And the younger you are, theoretically, the more risk you can take if you're comfortable, because you have that much longer timeline in terms of investment horizon to ride out any falls. Andrea, something that tends to go under the radar slightly, in my opinion, with pensions and the gap is that divorce can actually land a really big blow to women's pensions. Is that something that you see a lot?
You do. I mean, the key thing, it links into what you were just saying. So you've got the beginning, let's just say, where women are perhaps being the main child carer, and the pensions go on the back burner and the man keeps paying into his pension. But then the divorce will happen, but the women's priority is to house the children. So quite often they will give up the pension in favour of having a higher proportion of the equity in the property. And it comes down to a little bit of a nurture debate, but your pension then is your house. So yes, they're happy to, well, I'll downsize in the future when the children leave home. I've got teenagers. Children don't seem to want to leave home these days. So if that was my pension, you know, I can't access it without throwing my children out of the house. So I think that the gap is enhanced because of the way that obviously it's allowable to have a split of pensions, but quite often the woman will prioritise having a bigger share of the house or the cash to get a bigger house because she's trying to house her children, you know, so Absolutely. Yeah, but it does widen the gap.
It's that emotional link to money,
Yeah,
there, isn't it? And,
yeah.
and wanting to minimal disruption for the children. So we're going to leave the pensions topic there for the moment, but I no doubt expect that there'll be lots of questions in the Q&A. So as we wrap up, a couple of quick fire questions for everyone. So what's the one act that we can incorporate into our lives that will lead to change? So Andrew, I'm going to come to you first.
The one thing that we can do, you've
Yeah.
just got to see that, you know, savings is something that I do in the same way that I do my grocery shopping every week. I get paid, I put aside that amount of money for bills, of which one of them is my savings, because that one's going to benefit with me. This is what I've got left. This is how much I'm going to enjoy, and it is okay to enjoy money. This is how much I'm going to enjoy, and this is what I'm going to spend on maybe this month's activities. I don't know, but you know, definitely you shouldn't save after you've done everything else. It should be as important as your electric bill.
So pay yourself first when it comes to saving. Sarah?
So I'd say it's really important to be mindful about money. So if thinking about money isn't something that you automatically do, make it something that you do, because over time it'll gradually become a habit. So one of the things I really suggest is, if you're constantly picking up your mobile phone and looking at social media, add your current account app to those things that you check, so that whenever you pick up your phone, you automatically click on those familiar icons. Make your current account one of those things that you click on, because then just those sort of passive, oh yeah, I wonder how I'm doing, you will then keep an eye on it. Over time, obviously, if you've got investments, you can use your investment app as well. It's a really good way of kind of building it into automatic habits that you don't have to think about, which is really important.
Absolutely. I think my tip would be put boundaries between you and your savings. Very much works for me. If they are out of sight, they're out of mind.
Yep.
So separate savings account to my current account, and I automate it so it's collected on payday, paying myself first.
Yeah.
And then there is a time delay if I want to access that money, which means I'm far less likely to dip into it, because I have to hold myself accountable and think twice. Next question is whether we have any recommendations for people looking to start doing a bit of financial self-care. Is there a podcast or a book that you'd recommend? So Andrea, I'll come to you first.
I mean, there are a lot of good books, and there are a lot of good podcasts that you listen to, and even our own website has got access to a lot of information.
One of our famous podcasters with us here today.
But I personally like this book, which is called Get Rich Lucky Bitch by Denise Duffield Thomas. And she's just got some really very simple ways of getting your head around a money mindset, re-educating yourself about it, prioritising about it, to the point that you enjoy money. I think people are scared of money, but it's okay to enjoy money. It's okay to have saved some money, and then what you've got left, to have said, that much I'm going to spend on treats and that much I'm going to spend on the everyday. But she's kind of given you permission to, you know, make yourself as a priority. And what you said earlier, the power of the positive thinking, where you're, you know, I'm okay. It's okay to want to be wealthy. It's okay to want to be financially secure.
And Sarah?
Well, obviously, I'm going to recommend my own podcast, which is Switch Your Money On. But I would also say, don't feel that you've got homework that you must go off and do, that you've got yet another thing to add to your list. You know, if you can get these books on Audible, I know there's a lot of really great money books on Audible. I know Claire Barrett's book is on Audible, and that is a fantastic listen. Obviously podcasts, but there are just find ways. So if you can build that into, you know, if you've got to drive to your mum's house, or, you know, walk the dog, or whatever it is, you can have these things on in the background. It doesn't have to be yet another thing you've got to make time for. It can kind of fit into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of audiobooks, I think, also on Spotify, if you have that. The book that I have recommended is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. This is interesting because it's a series of short stories, so it's really easy to digest, and there'll be everything from kind of what is wealth to actually what is rich versus wealth. And it's a great one to suggest for a book club, just because it is those short stories that you can then talk through your favourites. So that brings the main discussion to a close. So we're going to move to audience Q&A. So the important investment notes will be up on screen. If you wouldn't mind all taking a minute or two to read through those. They just confirm that everything that we've all discussed is purely information. It's not to be considered financial advice. That, of course, investments can fall as well as rise in value, and that tax rules are subject to change. Fantastic. I'm afraid we will have to leave it there as we are now at time. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really do hope that you found it informative. Please do complete the feedback survey, which is in the chat. And if you haven't already joined the Financially Fearless community, please do. You will be the first to receive invites to events such as this, as well as weekly organic content that's financial information written for women by women, and you can see our Why Women Invest report now. If you're looking to take that first step on your investing journey, then do download that. Lots of useful tips. So thank you ever so much for joining. I'm really sorry if we haven't got to your question yet, but please do feel free to send those to us via Instagram or reach out to us directly, and we'd be more than happy to take those offline. Thank you for listening. And thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Andrea, for joining, particularly Andrea, who spent 5 hours travelling down here to the Bristol office yesterday. So thank you so much, and apologies for starting a couple of minutes late. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.